All right, time to get going here. Welcome to Admired Leadership Direct. And we're glad to see you all. It's a morning for lots of folks here in North America, but a good day to you wherever you might be joining us. If you've never joined us for an Admired Leadership Direct, we do these every 3 weeks for those who are full access subscribers to our community. Lots of high level discussion around leadership, tough questions, brilliant answers, of course. That's what we do around here. But the conversations are usually fascinating, and it's just one of the most exciting parts of the things that we do. We've decided here in 2023 to once a quarter unlock one of these episodes where we can go into a different kind of a format and bring folks that maybe you're a Field Notes subscriber, maybe you've been somebody that's gone through one of our introductory modules, maybe you've been just connected to somebody that's been a part of Admired Leadership, or somebody's reached out and you'd be like, what kind of conversations go on over there? What are these people doing when they're so serious about leadership? So whatever your issue is, if you're dealing with a new challenge in your work life, if there's a restructuring in your company, your organization, maybe you've been put into a new position where leadership is now something that you're having to think about more seriously, or perhaps you're a professional in an organization where it's part of your responsibility to develop leaders in your company. Well, that's the kind of thing that we're going to get into here. We have some special guests, and we're going to have a kind of a deep dive into what's happening in leadership development in their organization. Then we always make Q&A a big part of this. And so let me just really quickly say, you can submit questions. It can be questions for our guests. And so you can do that in the Q&A button at the bottom of your tablet, phone, device, on the laptop. You can comment in the chat and I might see that, but in the Q&A is a little bit better. Also, I had a bunch of advanced questions come in. We're going to get to those. So we'll take questions for the guests during the first segment of what we're doing. Then we'll dive into some of the other questions with one of the partners in our organization. And then we're going to have a little extended time at the end to have some discussion around just Admired Leadership and development, and a couple of new features for those of you who've been part of our community, and some things we're really excited about. So a lot to get to. And the key to making all of that really exciting is your attention, which we're grateful for, and again, the questions and comments that you might have. So to begin all of this, though, we have decided to kind of make this a focus where we are going to have a particular deep dive. And Carolyn Thomas is one of my colleagues who is exceptional at kind of knowing exactly what we need to talk about. Carolyn, you're here, and please tell us about our guests, and let's have a fascinating discussion.
Thanks so much, Scott, and thanks everyone for joining us. Yeah, I'm thrilled to have Vanessa Dupuy and Jameson Schuler from Celanese join us today. So I have had the very good fortune of knowing both of them for quite some time, and even better fortune to be able to work with them more recently as they announced and closed on what we've called a transformational acquisition for Celanese. So there's been a lot happening at the organization. And for those of you who don't know Celanese or haven't heard of them, they're a global chemical company based in Dallas, Texas, with now over 13,000 employees and over 30 countries. So large global Fortune 500 company that, I think has a unique view and unique take on leadership. And really what leadership development, maybe a bit of an unconventional thinking around leadership development in some ways. So, we throw the word admired around quite a bit, and not throw it around, but we use it to describe how we think of the best leaders. And we think of them as leaders who get great results while creating followership at the same time. And, I got to be honest, I've seen a lot of that at Celanese. And in some ways, I think of Celanese as an admired company because of how their culture is so results focused and responsible and accountable, yet so relational at the same time. So would love to, I'm thrilled to have Vanessa and Jameson here to talk a little bit about that. I don't know that they would describe it that way. But so both of you have been with the organization now for about 5 years, and would love to know, was that how it was when you joined, or has anything changed? And Vanessa, why don't we start with you, and maybe you can give a quick background on you as well, and then talk about what you've seen remain constant and change in your 5 years at Celanese.
Yeah. Well, Carolyn, thank you. And thank you to the team for hosting us. We're really looking forward to the conversation. As Carolyn said, I'm the CHRO at Celanese. I've been with the company for 5 years. I'm about to celebrate my 2-year anniversary as the CHRO next month. And for my peers on this call, it's been a wild 2 years. And it's on top of a transformational acquisition that we just did. And And so as I think about the past 5 years and the journey that we've been on, you know, I'm reminded that when I came in, I was the head of talent management at the time. And what brought me to Celanese was a conversation that I had with the CEO at the time. And it was during my interview, and I asked him what was important to him in his legacy. And his response to me was that he leaves behind a company that is always eye to eye with its employees, that we are never a company that hides behind policy, that hides behind process, but that as leaders, we, one, hold ourselves and people accountable for delivering results, that we are supportive and engaging in what people need, and that we always care. And it was the authenticity with which he spoke about that was really curious to me. And then when I asked him, well, what are you doing to develop talent? He didn't talk to me about programs. And in fact, he was a huge advocate for never having a program. He was a bit afar from where I think we are today, but was a huge advocate to never have a program. He thought everyone should have access to development, but that everyone should own their development, which was also really both curious and exciting to me. And so what that meant as the head of talent is that everything we put together had to be very practical and very much aligned with what we were trying to create as a culture, one of results and one of deeply engaging people. And so everything that we do is anchored in individuals and how we connect with them and how they are empowered to go drive their careers. And as you mentioned, we're now 13,000 strong. And so that will evolve. And we could talk more about that as we get into the conversation. But Jameson, I think you started 4 or 5 months after me, and look at it from a different perspective in the role that you play here.
Yeah, I think I did start shortly after Vanessa, and so it's coming up on now my 5 years. I lead global corporate communications here at Celanese and our community strategy as well. I'm a member of the HR leadership team here at Celanese. HR communications folds into HR, so Vanessa's my boss, so I'm being mindful of that today as I talk about our leadership and our culture.
I noticed you wore your Celanese orange.
I did. Loud and proud, that orange. You know, for me, one of the things that attracted me to the company, and I came from, you know, I started my career in agency. I was, you know, consultant side. When I went into corporate, I went into a pharmaceutical company, Eli Lilly and Company, and I was working in our diabetes franchise and got to launch a brand new drug, like a first in class, you know, really, you know, revolutionary. And that was fun. And pharma was a little bit of a kind of a direct to consumer type opportunity. Then I went into the dairy industry, and that was totally a consumer-facing family of brands and a lot of interesting work. And then this opportunity came up at Celanese, and I had to first Google who was Celanese and what did they do, and then found, you know, it's a B2B chemical company that nobody's ever heard of, and so I really had to do a little bit of soul searching to say, from a career perspective and where I was going in terms of communications, was this really going to be a fit for me in terms of what I experienced before? But what sold me was truly the way that the company thought about the employee population, and not just developing leaders, but this notion of, you know, being so much like a family and taking care of each other. And through the interview process, I was amazed, frankly, and even more so than once I was here, at the tenure of the talent of the people that I talked to. You come to Celanese and you stay at Celanese, and folks on, you know, on my team, you know, I've got somebody on the communications team who's been here for 27 years. And so that spoke to me as a people. We're all people. And that spoke to me in terms of, I want to work for a company that truly values its employee population like this one does. And so, yeah, we're a chemical company, and that's what we do, and it's B2B, and there may not be sex appeal to that on the surface, but boy, it's a great culture here, and that's I love that, and that hasn't changed. I think our culture has evolved, but that hasn't changed in the 5 years I've been here. We've seen a lot of change, transformational in some cases. We've seen a lot of leadership change, structural changes that are happening. But the value that we place on our people has not changed.
So what have the two of you, been doing and thinking about to solidify that culture and shape it as you go? So clearly, while we all think it's a great culture, and it's probably changed slightly over the last 5 years. And what have you done to shape it to a place where you think it's even stronger today?
I mentioned our prior CEO. We did have a CEO transition back in 2019. And connected to that work, there were some things that Jameson, myself, others mobilized around pretty quickly. And so maybe I'll talk about one aspect that the management team owned, and Jameson, you talk about the work that we owned with the global leaders. But one of the things we did was, as a management team, this is before I was CHRO, they came together and we outlined talent principles. And so we have a set of 8 principles as a management team, still 3 years later, that we anchor to, because we believe that while everyone is talented, that when we say talent, we are truly focusing in, zeroing in on the development, the advancement, the investment, on the people who are going to make a differentiated impact in the value that is created for the company and shareholders. Because if we do that, then we can continue to hire and reward and mobilize the rest of our workforce. And so we are very proud that those principles are focused on how we move talent. And I've been at many organizations in my career who I don't probably have colleagues on the call from Bank of America or Dell or Duke Energy. I mean, I've been with some larger organizations, have very good talent practices. And perhaps it's maybe because of the size we are at Celanese, but we move talent better than I've ever seen in a company. And one of the differentiators that I've observed here at Celanese is a question that we've adopted as leaders, which is, what needs to be true for this person to be successful? And we ask it honestly and we answer it honestly. And sometimes I'm a great example of that question, right? I mentioned I'm the CHRO for 2 years. No one was more surprised than I was when they offered me the job. I am the definition of ready enough. I was in the total rewards role for 90 days. They made me the head of total rewards and then asked me to be the CHRO. But Lori, our CEO, and our prior CHRO got together and said, what needs to be true for Vanessa to be successful? And they answered it honestly. And then they told me honestly. And then I put a plan together that my peers rallied around with me to help me be successful. Now, my reviews in 2 weeks will find out how successful I've been this past year. But it's that kind of commitment to growing talent at this company and using those principles and very specific questions, I think has kept the culture very strong around we win together and we support people in their moves. And so the management team's very in on that. Jameson, you want to talk about what we did for the organization?
Yeah, so broadly, again, after the CEO transition, we used it as an opportunity to take a fresh look at the vision for the company. Some companies have visions or missions or purposes. Here we have a what I would call a purpose-focused vision, but we have a vision statement, and so we refreshed that. We also came together as an executive team and anchored on a refreshed set of values. We have 6 values that we espouse here at Celanese. And so we used the opportunity then to take those out to the organization with Lori's voice now. And here is the vision for Celanese, where we're going. Here are the values that we have. And then we followed shortly with a new strategic plan for the company for the next 3 to 5 years. And that strategy sits, squarely in the middle of the vision at the top, and our values that underpin everything that we do. And what was interesting in that work, and this was Lori led, I'll give her the credit for it, is that people is the first component that's mentioned in terms of how we're going to achieve our vision. It's people. And people is also the first of our 6 values, and they are ranked in order on purpose. And so our vision is to improve the world in everyday life through our people, chemistry, and innovation. We're a chemistry company, but people were listed first. And then people is the first value that we talk about here. And we really do live it. We really do. I'll take a little peek behind the curtain of my morning. So we're here, I'm in this room, which is directly across the hall from our boardroom, where we're doing executive media training this morning. And so we were specifically talking about Zoom presentations. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm using the training that I just learned. But Lori and I had an opportunity to chat a little bit before we got started. And there's some very specific culture work that we're doing right now. And Vanessa, along with our Chief Information Officer, are leading that effort on behalf of the ELT. And so I was talking about some feedback that I discussed this morning with the CIO. And then the conversation evolved into, what a great team we have. And we were chatting about the leadership team and how invested, our CIO is in the culture of the company and how unique his perspective is and fresh it's been. And Lori made a comment about what a unique opportunity she has to cultivate that team. And so I think that as she's been putting together the executive leadership team, I can understand this notion of how do we make sure that everybody is enabled for success. And I think that, it starts at the top, and culture starts at the top. It also starts with our vision and with our values. And we talk about that a lot. It's part of the soundtrack here for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so compelling to me because as a results-focused chemical company, right? At first, honestly, when we started working with Celanese and I saw Jameson, you shared the vision and the values and all of that, and I was kind of like, really? Because there's a lot of organizations that have people in their values and have people as part of their strategy, but it's sort of the add-on. It's always the last component. It's always oh yeah, we can't forget about our people. And so at first I was kind of like, is this real? But it comes through. I mean, it comes through from your head of manufacturing and your focus on safety, which is another one of your values. But it's not just words on a slide. Yeah. And so, I'm guessing that some of that, starts with your senior most leadership team. But how else have you been able to embed the importance of people and also talent and leadership within the culture? How has it become more than words?
Yeah. I've been thinking about, in prep for this conversation, how do you look objectively at the culture that you live in for 5 years and really try to tease out some of that? Look, I think that there are symbols, right? Like tokens that we could point to throughout the company that would speak to, we are a people-oriented company. And we're so aligned on our people and the commitment we have. So it shows up in 100 different ways. I think about when we were in COVID and we were all scrambling in 2020. Like many companies, we came out of April with a really strong focus on cost management. No one knew where this was going. And so we started to make hard choices on where we were going to need to pull back on things. But when we were going through that work, anything that impacted people, we first put at the bottom of the list, but it's our biggest expense. So eventually you have to get there. But every people action had to have a mitigation plan with it to make it as minimally painful as possible. So we didn't do layoffs throughout 2020. We were able, through furloughs, vacation carryovers, and special COVID pay, to keep everyone in some form or fashion getting some level of a paycheck. And so we were very targeted with how we wound things down so that we could keep people making money as much as possible. We have a 5% 401k kicker that the company puts in for like sort of a pension replacement. We canceled it in 2020. By September of that year, things had turned around and we realized we could actually go give this back to employees. Now, we had already done the hard job of telling employees 3 months before that that money was gone, that we were not going to be able to pay it. And so in theory, we could have just moved on from it. But it was a very conscious decision to say, this is the right thing to do for our people, and we are going to do it. And those sorts of things happen all the time in Celanese. And I think it is because we are deeply aligned on that. I think the other piece, Carolyn, and we were talking about this a little bit the other day, sometimes you'll hear me say like, it's uniquely Celanese. I never used that before, but there are things that in my 25 years are really uniquely Celanese. And one of the things that is uniquely Celanese is this concept of we. And it's in how we say it is it's we before me. And as we think about the culture work that's ahead of us, bringing 5,000 new employees in, that is what we talk about most, is how do we ensure that we never lose we before me? Because as soon as we lose that, we believe everything else starts to break down. And so we are very focused on our action plans around culture, on how do we drive that concept of we before me. Our goals are oriented that way. Our incentive plans are oriented that way. We don't have divisional incentives. It's we all make it or we all don't. And so it is very much ingrained in how we get after things. And we're doing it with our synergy targets, which, you know, we've announced publicly. We've got 500 million of synergy that we need to go get after. We all have our targets. I'm going to fall short. I already can see it. And so I went to my CFO, I had the conversation, and within 24 hours, 3 of my peers had come to me and said, I will go find it for you. Don't cut any deeper. And it's that sort of like, we are in this together. That we heard it in our culture survey feedback that we did, that our employees feel that. Mm-hmm. And so we want to very much keep that as part of who we are.
That's great. So I worry that this is going to become a commercial about how fantastic Celanese is.
I know, and there's really all sorts of stuff I could poke at. If you...
I know, there definitely are. But what we want to do too is a couple of questions have come in from some of the attendees. So I want to talk too about how you develop your teams and how you develop yourselves as well. But let's pause for a second, and everyone else who's joined us, you're welcome to submit questions to the Q&A. But Scott, it sounds like we may have 1 or 2 that have come in.
We do, Carolyn. Let me pop myself back on here, and I'll make sure I can get the question as written. One of the questions here was about, you mentioned refreshing vision and values, and I think that was a nice word, which is because you do want there to be a core to any organization or company, and so, but that doesn't mean you can't like refresh language and imagery and maybe evolve things. And so the question from Megan was, what did you draw on? I think her question was particularly, was it an EOS process or some other process that you used to do that? How did you go about that?
I'll jump in, and Vanessa, you can add anything else that you would like. I am extremely proud because all of the work that we did around our vision and values was in-house, homegrown work. I use the term refresh because the company did have vision and values before, and we didn't see, while there was a leadership change, we didn't see a need to completely upset the cart. So what we did as a team was we did a good old-fashioned audit. What is the actual vision and the values that we have as a company today, and what's the language that we use? But how else do we talk about the company internally and externally? What were speeches that were given? How do we position it on our website? What are our customer-facing materials? And we pulled all of this together. And I remember the room it was downstairs on 9. The whole team got together, the communications team. We had whiteboards, and we really started kind of working it and said, what words do we think resonate the most, and what are those elements that we don't want to lose as we rethink and refresh this. But to be candid, it also needed to be simplified, because what we had before was relatively complex. And so what was born out of that work was then taken to our executive team, workshopped a few times. Then we actually did a global roadshow with our senior most leaders, region by region, and that's where the strategy was ultimately built. But we also shared some of the version of our vision and values to get feedback from the global leaders before we really, tied a bow on it and then rolled it out to the organization. So there was not. We had really fertile ground from which to work, but I'm pleased with where we landed on that, because it does feel like a refresh. We did not want it to feel so radically different. At that time, we had 8,000 employees. The company should not sound, from a vision and value standpoint, that different from what we had before.
Right. And my one follow-up just from me on this, when you talk about the way that you went and looked at speeches, documents, you're looking at the artifacts of how things were being talked about. Was part of that to make the refresh and the focus on the values not something that's aspirational that we might want to be, but more like, no, this is actually who we are? Was that part of the looking for the clues in the way that the language is already being used?
Yeah, I think particularly from a value standpoint, yes. So I do think that our vision is somewhat of a purpose vision and an aspirational vision, but the values, safety has been such an enormous part of our culture for such a long time. We're a publicly traded company, so shareholder value is still one that we're, driving. Customers are, of course, a value. So yes, it was how have we been talking about the company? What are those artifacts, and how do we make sure that some of that it's that thread, right, that ties from before into where we're going in the future. The vision, I would say, is fairly different from where we started, but even the vision, so I use an example, the improving the world, that in particular, which is the way that we start our vision, was a value previously. And our team said, you know what, that needs to be lifted up to be the vision of this organization. It is not just a value that we have that improve the world, but this is a vision. And so that's an example where folks were familiar with that language. If you've been at Celanese for a while, you knew improving the world, but now it had gotten, really kind of top status.
With people, right after that.
That's right. Improving the world with people. Yeah.
The one other question here, Carolyn, and then I'll pop back off, but feel free, by the way, anybody, if you want to start submitting questions for the guests, and then I'll organize those and pop back on when it's the right time. But the other question that had come in was about talent, and you particularly talked about this powerful question of like what would be required for this person to succeed, and one of the things mentioned also was that it was a measure of the company about tenure, right? That people just came, they stayed, and that can be a wonderful measure. The question being, sometimes though people can be stuck, right? And that sometimes long tenure could be seen as a negative in certain organizations. How has Celanese kept the vitality around those folks who have been, real dedicated in their service over many years?
Such a great question, Scott. I think that my response is really going to be probably clouded by the 5 years that I've been here, because there was a lot of change in that time period. It's particularly when you have a CEO transition, right? That creates in a kinetic energy in the system when you've got a new CEO at the helm. In contrast to our prior CEO, Lori first is a female, so the head of a manufacturing chemical company. She is an outlier for sure, but I'd put her up against anyone, no doubt. But she also grew up in manufacturing, which our prior CEO really, he was in manufacturing companies, but really came through commercial P&L, like early days was manufacturing, but then moved over to business. Her orientation sort of created energy, because suddenly you could feel this vibe in our manufacturing side of the company, which is 60% of our company. And when I look at tenure, that's really where it's sitting. They felt this, like they were all puffed up because, the head of the company is one of ours, right? So I think the CEO transition and the handprint that now she wants to leave on the company can create energy. Now, in the absence of a CEO transition, it's how do you bring your organization, for us, how did we bring the organization on the journey with our strategy? And so as we're creating new strategy, how do we bring voice to that outside of the small people who work on the strategy? How do we all work in the strategy? How do we raise expectations of individuals aligned with what we need to deliver from the strategy so that that tension always remains? We are a company, you heard Carolyn and Jameson say it, when we say we're results oriented, yeah, but we will drive through walls to get results. It is this momentum and energy. And so my role is, how do we keep pulling that through and up through how we set goals, how we incentivize people, so that there's this reach. And when there isn't the reach, because as I said, we've got our talent principles. One of our principles is, if someone isn't going to make it, we're going to make the tough call. And so we are willing to move people in, up, or out, depending on where the organization's going. And you said, Carolyn, it's not all rosy, and Jameson and I don't have the easiest jobs of anyone in this field. There's tough choices and a lot of discipline that is a dirty word at Celanese that we don't always like to have in how we do work. But I think that's how we keep the lift.
All right, I'll duck back and look for more questions. And when you're ready for more, bring me on.
All right, great. Thanks, Scott. So both of you are leaders of the organization, and you're also leaders of your own teams. And on your teams, you have leaders. So you've got leaders all across. I'm curious, what are some of the things that you're doing? You said that development is highly personalized, and you've empowered your teams to develop themselves. So what are some of the things that you encourage them to do, or some of the things that you've recommended to your teams, or how are they staying fresh and developing themselves?
Jameson, I think you've got some great stories.
Oh, I don't know. I think we're, well, of course, admired leadership membership is an important one for me and my direct reports. We are very feedback forward here, and I'm not as good at it as I should be or could be. I'm continuing to try to be better. I think we develop a lot through coaching and feedback, but also experience. I mean, what I appreciate, yes, we're now 13,000 employee company and 30 countries and such. It still feels like a small business in many ways, and that we have an idea, and a couple days later we're executing on it. And so I love that we can be nimble and agile that way. And what that provides, at least for my team, is an opportunity to do lots of things for the first time. And so for us and for our development, it's, let's figure it out. Let's make sure we're networked. Let's look out, where else are there best practices that we can learn from. Let's give feedback when feedback is due, both positive and constructive. Trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? Let's figure out the problems on our own, and not necessarily always looking for that easy button either. There are some tough that we have to work through, and I think having the discipline and sometimes the maturity to actually roll up your sleeves and work through it, that's been developmental, at least for me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we see some of the best leaders reward their people with experiences, right? And sometimes experiences are stretches, but that exposure and being able to tackle a new problem can be highly motivating for all the right people, right? Vanessa, you had mentioned the other day that the leadership team and the board really is focused on getting to know young talent. How has that evolved over time?
Yeah, this is something that our current head of talent management came up with a couple of years back. She designed a lowercase p program for my colleagues on the call. I wouldn't necessarily put this in the traditional program sense, but it is, again, very Celanese. It is practical, it is simple, it was written on the back of a napkin, and now we're doing it. And so we call them the ELT, our executive leadership team, my peers and I, we are each assigned 3 people that are not in our functional area. They're people that we can't currently know. And for over the course of 6 months, we are meant to spend time with them. We do all, if they're co-located with us, we'll go to lunches, and really the goal is to become an advocate, another voice around this person's career, maybe a connection for them into other areas of the company. At the end of the 6 months, we've got to fill out a summary of what the experience was like for us, who else on the ELT we would recommend that they meet with next to further it. And so that's been a really nice connect point for us. Really important this year with our 5,000 new colleagues, because we are a relationship company. And as I reminded our CEO the other day, when she said to me, the M&M people, they don't trust us yet. And I reminded her that the reality is we don't trust them yet either. If we're really honest, until we have shared experiences, shared successes, shared failures, that trust, like, we've got to harvest it both ways. And so this year we'll focus exclusively on the talent in the organization that we acquired. Same with our board of directors. Anyone who is on an ELT succession plan, we have meeting with our board. We are very open door with our board. We bring talent in to present in committee, in board all the time. We do dinners with the board. We like to give our talent exposure to the board, and we do it broadly and deeply in the organization.
That's great. So one of the questions that came in that I saw in the Q&A is related to, we've talked a lot about what you think you're doing right. Tell us about a time that you got wrong and how you corrected. So so thoughts on that question from both of you?
Well, let me reach into my volumes of examples on that.
Just don't reach into my performance review yet. That's a couple weeks away.
Yeah, I think that we knee jerk on talent too quickly at Celanese. I'm keeping a list of everyone we were wrong about from the acquisition, as we've had some very heated debates of me trying to slow my peers down on judgment and assessment of talent, to get enough to what I was just talking about, enough experiences with them. And right now I'm up to 4 people who we were wrong on. Either we thought that they weren't going to make it, and now we're so glad they're here, or we thought we're going to be amazing, and perhaps now we're seeing that the friction might just be too much. And so trying to get us to slow down, particularly on talent decisions, is very challenging. It's also the con of when you don't have a lot of formal assessment, development, objective criteria that you could point to broaden perspective on talent. Being a relationship company, being a company that really focuses on people, it's no surprise that we have high emotion in the company, and so sometimes that emotion is applied to people, and we just need to take a beat and get more data. And I think that's something that we've got to do much better at.
Great. Anything you look back on, Jameson, and say, if I could turn back time, I would.
I thought you were going to move on to something else. I think I mean, this is just personal reflection at this point. I do not, I need to continue to do better at enabling my team and moving through things. I can't remember if this was an ALI analogy that I've heard, but this notion of sometimes when the team is struggling with a problem, imagine yourself at the whiteboard and they're up working on the equation, and then the solution, and so they hand you the marker and you go up to the board and you're kind of figuring it out. And I think too often I continue to hang on to the marker as opposed to then handing it back to my team and saying, okay, you got this. And so for me, that's where I've reflected on, could I have done better? It's usually because I didn't enable the team. I didn't get out of the way. I held on to things a little bit too much. Didn't give the feedback that I should. I'm relatively conflict averse, and it's easier for me sometimes just to keep my mouth shut and bottle it in. And as Vanessa just talked about, there's passion here, and so we care so much, and then that can come out the wrong way. And I think even I had a moment this year where it came out the wrong way, and I had a not ideal interaction with our CFO. And he recognized it and I recognized it, and we very quickly hugged it out. And that's, part of what I think works so well here is that we can be really candid and real with each other. He understood why I was passionate about it, and it was coming from a good place. But those are the types of things, the moments that I wish I could go back and redo.
Yeah.
Maybe Carolyn, if I can add on, I was reflecting, I responded in terms of Celanese, but I do think there's many examples as a leader, right? And the one that comes to mind as I was listening to Jameson speak is, maybe we say this every year, but it does feel like there's a lot going on for those who are in these functions of communications and HR. I mean, we've just been in the thick of it in hard work, right? Like energy taking work, not energy giving work. And as I look at my first 2 years as CHRO, if I could redo it, and I don't know how I would even do it, Carolyn, but if I could redo it, I'd just pay way more attention to what my people are going through and what they need from me. I think there's a lot of you just running to the next thing and trying to transact the next deliverable. And when I came back from this break with fresh eyes, I could see how worn down the team is. And I missed it last year. Like I really missed it. And so I think that's something as leaders, I can't miss those things. I've got to catch it.
Yeah, it's hard to when you're in the thick of it too, right? You probably felt the same way, and maybe thought you were shielding some of it from your team, but maybe not as much as you thought.
Yeah.
So we've gotten a couple more questions into the Q&A that I think are interesting and great for you. So Nadine says, congratulations on your great work, Vanessa and Jameson. What are your top several ideas for continuing your work to build your company's culture? Thank you in advance for your thoughts. So I know you're thinking a lot about culture right now as you integrate this new business into the organization. What are some of the priorities that you have?
So Jameson mentioned that the CIO and I are co-sponsoring this culture imperative. Each of my peers have an imperative that they're sponsoring as the ELT. Maybe I'll talk about how we approached it. When we started this, we announced the deal in February of last year, and we knew culture was going to be the big rock for us. I'll be honest, I really didn't know how we were going to get after it. And so we just started to chop it down. And so the first thing we did was, as a leadership team, we articulated the cultural traits that we believe, much like we talk about talent, needed to be true in order for our company to be successful post-acquisition. And those 5 traits are, we put out there before we did the culture survey, because and what I mean we put out there, we like just knew that those were the ones we wanted to go after. So we did a culture survey of our current Celanese base. Then when we closed the deal shortly after, quickly after, we did a survey of our newly acquired team members because we didn't want them to get too ingrained in our culture. And we now just received those results back. We're reporting out to the board on that in 2 weeks. And what we found in that, which is really interesting, when you look at the overall workforce of Celanese, we call them M&M, that's the division, Mobility Materials, Celanese and M&M, the workforce is actually more similar than dissimilar across the culture traits. The leadership of M&M is also very similar to the overall workforces of each group. So there's the three of those clusters sort of hang together across the culture traits. The Celanese leadership starts to pull away. And, you know, I think what is interesting as we've dug into the insights from the survey is at Celanese, we've maybe in our culture that we don't even realize is that we've got an entire population of people, legacy Celanese, who have figured out how to translate the behaviors of leadership into ways of working out in the fields. And, you know, maybe that's worked for us, but now you've got an entire M&M workforce, including their leadership, who's speaking an entirely different language as it relates to culture. And so we've narrowed in on the two areas, two cultural traits that we think from a leadership perspective, we all have to move. One is around, no surprise, personal relationships. It is a very deep culture trait at Celanese, and the M&M side is further away. They're more hierarchical. And so we want to move them. The other is around, also no surprise, discipline. The entire organization is process oriented, right? And the Celanese leadership, not very disciplined, but we need to move toward the rest of the organization. We know that in a larger organization, we need, in the right ways, the right things to be disciplined. So where do we go from here? We've got, because this really is a focus on moving leadership, there's a lot that we're doing with leadership. So first, each area, each of the ELT members has a playbook that we're going to go get after based on the results in our respective areas against the culture traits that we're trying to get toward. I talked about the ELT one-on-ones with the M&M employees. We also have this sort of top 40 concept of the top 40 leaders in the company. We're bringing them together in June with a real focus on leadership. And then in the fall, the leadership team will go around the world. We'll do 3 global leadership meetings, 1 in each region, where we will have a very strong focus on culture and leadership expectations. So we're doing a refresh of our job architecture, our leadership competencies, all anchored around the culture we want to create. And then I was just talking with our CEO the other day. We're having an ELT offsite, and she asked that we spend half a day. So we're together 3 days. She wants to spend half a day on culture. And to me, that's just a commitment of, we know that this is the thing that will dilute value from the deal if we don't get after it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try to answer the next question more concisely.
No, I mean, I think what you described is a very systemic and systematic way of looking at culture and saying, where do we want to be and where do we think we need to go and how do we design for that? And you've got data, and so appreciate that level of detail. I think that the commitment from the leadership team and how much time you've spent on it and really being honest with yourselves about what do we need to do is hopefully for the new organization, the combined organization, something that they see shine through. I'm sure they will. So we've got a few more questions. So you know, given the relational nature of your organization, what we find sometimes with clients is that highly relational cultures can also be highly feedback averse, because oftentimes team members don't know how to deliver feedback in a way that doesn't damage the relationship, and or they don't have the relational, the depthness of the relationship that they think they have. It's kind of a surface level situation. But either way, can you talk a little bit about feedback and how it's collected in the organization, and how do you know you're getting honest feedback from your colleagues?
You want to take that, Jameson, since you talked about feedback a moment ago?
I think it goes back to one of the things that Vanessa talked about earlier, which is trust. And I recognize that I'm privileged that I've been here for 5 years and have built the relationships over time, particularly with the leadership team, that I can trust that feedback or feedback from my peers. I think one of the ways that it's true is because particularly if it's constructive feedback, you feel it. It stings, and I mean, we all know. We know what our areas are. Rarely, I think, do we have true blind spots. For me, I think, I am the guy at work that I am at home. And there's no faking it. And so what I appreciate is the ability to, go into Vanessa's office and say, close the door, say, I'm going to talk to you now as a friend and not as a peer, or not as your subordinate, and be able to be really, really, and I feel that really across the leadership team, across my team, across my peer set. I just appreciate the ability to ask for and feel like you're receiving very honest feedback. I'm not great about giving it, but I think to the extent that we can, we give it because we care. We care about you as an individual, as a professional. We care about the enterprise and the success of where we're going and the brand of our team and the company and such. And so I think that culturally, I'm not sure how to put exact pin on it, but I feel like people understand and get that, and therefore are a little bit more receptive, to the feedback. I've had 2 kind of tough conversations this week. One, I was on the receiving end of the feedback, and but I appreciated it. And then another one where I gave it, and I think that there's a lot of coaching that you guys have, and asking how questions and those types of things I think are really important. But I think that being truthful and candid and transparent and showing that that you care is the root of how to make it resonate well with the receiver.
I'll add maybe 2, and I'll be quick because I want to be sure we get some more questions. Maybe 2 other things that are important. One is we are not very formal as a culture, so there's not a lot of hierarchy, and so people feel very comfortable showing up in my office and giving me feedback. It's very comfortable, and all sorts of people get on the CFO's calendar to talk about all sorts of things. So there's this lack of formality that I think people feel comfortable. But also several years ago, there was it actually ended when I got here. There was a movement in the organization around inclusive language. And when we first got here, Jameson and I, people were using these words and we were like, what are they talking about? They'd say things like, I'm going to share my street corner. And so it was really like, I'm just going to tell you what my point of view on this is, but I'm going to challenge as an ally was another word. And so people would say these things, which helped give a shared language to feedback. We don't use those words anymore because now I think we've become very comfortable giving feedback, but I suspect that movement might be because we weren't as good as it prior.
It helps to understand how to disagree agreeably with somebody.
Yes.
And, that was clearly a priority within the organization. Just an observation too, we see the best leaders really think intentionally about how do I strike a balance with my feedback too? Because sometimes we hear feedback and we just think negative, right? We think constructive criticism, that kind of thing. But and the best leaders try to have a balance of positive feedback and constructive. And I think that from what I've seen at Celanese, the leadership team really does try to do both, right? It's not just here's what's not going well, but they make a point of calling people out and saying, hey, that was really great for these 4 reasons, and we need to keep doing that. So I do feel like there is a intentionality about the balance there.
Well, I'm even this morning. So first meeting this morning was an 8 a.m. meeting. It was Vanessa's HR leadership team. And we come together in the room and she says, what recognition do you guys have? And the idea was that, any of us can bring in recognition of folks that were on our team or outside of our team. Where have we seen some good things happening in the last couple of weeks? And how do we make sure that that person knows that that was recognized? And so, just modeling it that way, it's a simple exercise. Vanessa follows up then with somebody, you know, who might have been named in that conversation. It's also just a refreshing way to start a meeting and talk about the good that's happening in the world and within our teams and outside our teams. So that's the kind of stuff that creates some of that balance, Carolyn. I think that is important.
Yeah. So there's another question about the movement piece of talent, Vanessa, and it's an anonymous question, but essentially, I think it hits on something we see a lot of organizations struggle with. You see a lot of organizations who don't move talent around. It's like you're in your discipline, you're in your technical subject matter area, and you stay in there. And that means that in some organizations, there's not a lot of opportunity for mobility because of tenure for different reasons. And so talk about your ability to move talent around. You know, the question or the comment is, it sounds difficult given that you need specific talent in specific areas of the company. Can you describe how you do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so first, we are very clear on feeder roles. And we don't put a lot of rigor and process around it because it would never last at Celanese. But we know that in order to come out of manufacturing, your path is likely going to be into a couple of areas. Procurement, which is a fantastic move from manufacturing into procurement. Supply chain, we have great success moving manufacturing into supply chain. Well, once you're in either of those places, the next great move for you is probably either a sales role or a small P&L. And so when we get into that realm, moving from manufacturing into procurement or supply chain, that's pretty easy because they're always looking for great talent. And so they trust that our head of manufacturing when he says someone's good, they're good. Or when someone on his team says they're good, they're good. So they're always fishing in that pond to get talent into their organization, to the point that I've told the head of manufacturing, you have to stop giving all your great diverse talent to other organizations, because we want great diverse talent in manufacturing to help recruit more folks into manufacturing. And so I want to see those female manufacturing people get into manufacturing leadership roles, right? So we're trying to make sure we're feeding both pipelines. The other is, because we believe it's a leader's accountability to develop talent, we have our forum we call it HR Exec Committee, and that's made up of our heads of procurement, manufacturing, our 2 business lines, and their big leaders. They all come together, I think it's like every other month, and they look at open roles at a certain level, and they start slating people, and they do it as a collective group. And there is no, I'm not giving that person up, or I'm only bringing the goal is to move talent. And so they show up with that goal in mind. And that routine has worked really well because they're the decision makers. They own the budget, the head count, right? And so that's worked really well for us.
That's great. So it sounds like passion for the business and for the company really is what the qualifier is, right? To move into those different organizations. So we've got a couple minutes left. Scott, any final questions that you have from the chat or that you've had come into you that we want to pose as we wrap up?
Sure. And I know you guys have lots of other things. You got to get back to that training across the hallway that talked about. But one of the things that Megan asked here was, you used that important phrase for Celanese, we before me. And I think it caused the thinking then, how does that help in your hiring and recruiting? Are referrals and connections, does that affect your turnover rate? Is there a positive outflow of that philosophy?
I'd have to think about that. I haven't put that in. I haven't put those things in the context of we before me. Listen, Jameson mentioned we're pretty long tenured. I think we have a healthy attrition. I think overall we're at about 8% voluntary attrition, maybe a little higher in the 10%. This past year, I think sounds about right with all of the labor, talent wars and all of that stuff. But I think we've got a pretty healthy attrition rate. I think meaning it's good. We get some refresh in there. I think we could do better on our employee referral program. Remember, we're a manufacturing company, and so a large portion of our workforce they're on shift, right? They're coming in, they're doing their job, and they go home. They do it very engaged and safely, and we're proud of that. But it is probably more in the category of I've got a job that I do versus a career that I'm managing is more what we see in our operator population. But we've got to tap into that group a bit more, and get more referrals is certainly a priority for us.
Great. And Carolyn, we have some more questions that are more general that I think you and I can tackle once we get our guests back to their day jobs and all of that. But great questions that came in from everybody. So thank you for all of this. And
Vanessa and Jameson, thank you so much for joining us. I can't think of two people I'd rather spend an hour with, so appreciate your time. And Jameson, you might be one of the biggest evangelists of our field notes. Really, can't. We didn't even get into some of those, but we'll next time we'll talk about your out of office response. So thanks again. Really appreciate it. We'll talk soon, and appreciate your time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, terrific. So I'm just going to remove a few of the spotlights here. If you don't know in Zoom, if you haven't played around with the spotlight feature, doing this just lets you do these things and move people around a little bit. It's not like a full control room like back when I was in regular television, but it kind of works. So Carolyn, let's get to a couple of questions, and then we'll get on to a few new features we want to talk about, and just let both subscribers and those who've just been curious about Admired Leadership know about. You mentioned Jameson as an evangelist for our field notes, and we did invite folks that get our field notes out to, which is well over into the 5 figures now of subscribers. So welcome to all of you who this may have been your first connection with Admired Leadership. But part of what we do on AL Direct for our subscribers is we do tackle questions, and we kind of go into as high an elite level as we can on some of those questions. So let's get a few of them. And one of them is more of, it kind of goes right to something that's in our introductory module about the difference between habits and behaviors and techniques and routines and hacks. And Arik is saying, we're critical of hacks that can detract from, sort of true leadership, effective and authenticity. And the question, Carolyn, is, here we are on Zoom, and even, Jameson was like, I got to do the right thing I learned about Zoom. How hard is it to stay focused on those enduring things and not just sort of get distracted by the hacks and tips that might be coming through that we think make us effective, but maybe don't?
Well, I mean, I think it all depends on your media consumption, honestly. I think that people who are consuming lots of different media and from lots of different places, it's really easy to get distracted. I think those people who are highly diligent about filtering out the things that maybe are interesting but not all that useful, and who've really become discerning about what is quality, they don't have a hard time at all. So that's maybe a personal view more so than anything else. But I've learned, even for myself and for some of our colleagues, it's very easy to get distracted. I mean, there's just so much content out there now. But a lot of it is so general and so principles focused that I don't really know what to do about it. And so rather than focusing on the tried and true, what I know has helped me all along, I get distracted by that, and then, always end up coming back to it. So I think the question is, what are the things you always go back to? Maybe you should just stick with those.
Yeah, those big rocks. And here's a question that I don't think I've ever kind of heard phrased quite this way, but I like it. How do you best manage a direct report? And the phrase here is highly competent direct report, mm-hmm. who has more energy and capacity for work than you do.
You delegate everything to them.
Right. Your job just got a lot easier, right?
If you're not uniquely qualified to do it, give it to them. I think that's what a wonderful problem to have.
Yeah.
Honestly. I mean, what we find is some of the best leaders, they're the ones with the capacity and the passion, and they are pulling everybody else along. And so if you've got somebody who's pulling you along, sometimes it feels bad. Sometimes you're like, oh boy, maybe I need to step up and do more because this person's, making me look bad, or they're more passionate about this than I am.
Mhm.
But I think the question is, how do you really harness that? And how do you, give them, again, rewarding with special projects and experiences is a hugely inspiring move for your direct reports. And so how do you think about it in that way, as opposed to, how do you manage that person?
Yeah. I liked what Vanessa said. We will drive through walls, right? Like they are like an action. And I don't know that I've ever heard a company sort of self-describe themselves as, we are high emotion. That's what it's like. Oh, this is a good definition. So you can imagine being around folks down there at Celanese and being really, fired up. So that's good to hear. And I get, I always think of that Warren Buffett line that intensity is the price of excellence. And so sometimes intensity and energy and capacity is a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, walking around, they talk a lot about the 12th floor there. That's where their executive team is. And walking around the 12th floor is an interesting experience, very different from a lot of large organizations, but it is because of all the things she talked about. They're hugely informal. They all roll up their sleeves. It's all about, how do we be successful? And sometimes that means that there's some emotion and passion that comes out that is sometimes, like she talked about too, maybe they move a little too quickly on things or can be a little bit reactive. But nobody can say they're not passionate about the work or about their team or about what they're trying to do. And so it's hugely inspiring at the same time.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I actually sort of, she mentioned a phrase, and I've heard you talk about this phrase, and I put it on Twitter this morning, not knowing that this would sort of come up indirectly. But you can go like it at BakerLink on Twitter. But I've heard you talk about that idea of like on my street corner, right? So when I'm driving home, if I drop off my 8-year-old and I pass 7 bus stops on the way home where kids gather on these corners, right? And 6 of them are pretty normal. The kids are there, they're ready, the parents got their coffee, and this one, I pass it every day. This one corner, they are dancing, they're asking you to honk your horn, they're throwing snowballs. It is a party every day. And every day I think, how do you get to be on that street corner? Right? I'd like to be around that kind of energy. So I don't know.
Great.
Let me tie 2 things here together from 2 questions that came in, and then we're going to also bring on some of our colleagues, Wes and Eli, here in just a second. But the one question is about when we think about training, but also just in development, we think about active learning rather just like, here are some notes, or here's this. And I liked what Vanessa said about it's not a program. You have to own your development, which is a really strong idea. And then tied to that, we had an anonymous question from a new subscriber, big fan of the Field Notes, who has seen some of our one-day events. Like we have one upcoming in Miami on March 6th. So we obviously have a 4-day event that we have been doing in Utah and now in Napa and the Berkshires. But some of these one-day events, and I don't think, Carolyn, you've been able to go to one, but the idea of being in a room with other leaders where we're exploring admired leadership content, where it becomes more visceral. What is the magic of that to you?
I mean, the magic in that is really the dialogue, right? And I think it's a counterintuitive way to think about it for some people who are very traditional when they think about development. They think about the presentation in front of the room with the slides and all of that. And what we find is that that's not hugely engaging, and people are they're not in the conversation, they're observing the conversation. But B, that you learn more from, or as much from, all the people in the conversation as you do the person facilitating it and leading it. So when we do the one-day sessions, and I haven't been to one, but I can imagine it based on my other experiences, it is about what have we seen the best leaders do, and us sharing some of the wisdom that we've gleaned from those leaders, and hearing about it from some of the people in the room. So we didn't create our admired leadership content. We've observed it, and we've cultivated it. We've found it and uncovered it. And you see it already happening in a lot of organizations. And so when you ask the question of how do you know your feedback is honest, or some of those feedback questions, some of it's happening inside organizations already. And it's magical for me when one of the people in the dialogue is the one who brings it up and not us. So I think, the question about active learning and what's our perspective on that? We want everybody to be in the conversation, not observing it. And so we're highly intentional when we think about development to make it as dialogue based as possible.
Right. Yeah. And the thing I like about our emphasis on dialogue and conversation is it kind of presupposes that there's going to be a relationship there. And we probably don't get much better from bullet points, right? You're not going to, some list on a Twitter thread isn't going to make you better, but in a relationship, in a real conversation, you can get some transformation. And in fact, we're going to be doing some new things at Admire Leadership involving dialogue and discussion. And I'll get to that in just a bit, but I want to bring in Eli and Wes here. So, and Carolyn, if you want to hang around, I'm going to take you off screen just for a minute, but we may need to call on your expertise here in short order. So, but let me go ahead and bring on my colleagues. And here is Eli, and here is Wes, and Wes has got the cool background. And these guys are talking to organizations all the time about their leadership development and what they're seeing and what they need and where things are really changing. And so, knowing that we've unlocked this episode to have both special guests, Q&A, but also some of you just curious. And as we just had this question from somebody who's like, I don't even know what's going on at these one days, but I love these field notes. So these are the guys who are around to answer your questions. So I'll let you guys take it away, and then Carolyn and I will be nearby for when that time comes. So thanks.
Great. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And it's been a great session this morning, and what a great profile and example of admired leadership. Just want to highlight, if you're unfamiliar, in admired leadership, we really believe really two core values. And those values are that leadership is about what you do, not necessarily who you are or what you think. And the second one is that the best leaders invest in learning the behaviors needed for successful leadership. So wanted to make you aware, if you'd like to explore more about admired leadership, I'm going to pass it to Wes. He's going to share a few thoughts with us as we wrap up.
Thanks, Eli. Thanks also to Scott, Carolyn. You guys are always giving little nuggets of information that I get so much out of. And then especially thanks to Vanessa and Jameson. I appreciate so much the way they share for such a genuine and authentic place, especially at the level of responsibility that they have in their organization. I was already passionate about this work, but after hearing Vanessa and Jameson's passion, and especially how they communicate from that very transparent place, results-oriented place, I'll be honest, I'm thinking of adding some Celanese orange to my wardrobe as well that Jameson had. They came across with almost a hostility towards complacency. That's what I wrote down as I was hearing from them. As I shared just a couple quick stories to provide some additional color to admired leadership, some of the conversations that we're having right now, I don't want you to miss those two beliefs that you heard from Eli just now. You probably hear us tag to these foundational pieces in everything we say, everything we think about. We know leadership is what you do, and what leaders do should make people in situations better. Very simple, practical approach to leadership. We believe this to our inner core. Admired leadership hits personally with me, a very personal chord. Early on in my career in Atlanta, Georgia, I was being recognized in my company for very high performance. On one particular evening, I was asked to facilitate a discussion for a group of leaders around the keys to the results that we were experiencing. I'll never forget 20 minutes before I was about to pop up and begin communicating to everyone, my direct supervisor pulled me aside and said, Wes, two things. Number one, wish you good luck. Number two, I want to let you know I'm going to create some opportunities for you to engage with other leaders in more meaningful conversation. She said, you need some coaching. That second piece welled up an enormous amount of tension in me. I was taken aback. What was initially feeling like a celebration of my talent all of a sudden jumped into a critical performance review. Why would I need coaching, and aren't I the one presenting to everyone else? To this day, that individual holds a very special place for me. She went on to explain after the evening's agenda that she wanted me to speak to other leaders about whatever I wanted to, but one central theme had to be this idea of work-life balance. What she was seeing in our company, she wanted it to be sustainable and long-term. And the way it was currently going, she was envisioning just the opposite. There were two outcomes from that experience that set the stage for the rest of my work and personal life. First, I was headed to burnout and I did not know it, but another leader did. Dialogue with other leaders, dialogue that you've heard us talk about throughout the call, and coaching was not a reactive approach to bad performance, but a proactive choice to invest in making a good leader better. Secondly, while I was so thankful to have come to this realization and awareness, I was abundantly frustrated with the lack of practical, what can I do tomorrow solutions from the sessions I experienced at that time. I was guided through a lot of different frameworks, rubrics, personality, psychogymnastics. Many of you on the call have probably been through those as well, all of which provided me immense clarity and awareness. But did it make me better? At that stage, I felt like I was on my own. Enter Admired Leadership. This is the exact sandbox Admired Leadership plays in at a very preeminent level. Clear, practical behaviors of the best of the best. You heard Carolyn speak to the fact that Admired Leadership has studied the world's most admired leaders for over 35 years. It's not something a bunch of individuals sat in a room and said, hey, this sounds cool. It's 35 years of uncovering many of the unknown behaviors and routines that have existed that lead to excellence. The origination was a group that was brought into a large energy company years ago, asking the question, who are our leaders? Hundreds of leaders were found during that process. Some leaders driving extraordinary results for the organization, other leaders driving extraordinary influence through relationship. We like to refer to that as followership, but only two very special leaders were found. One, an individual running a project in Nigeria, and the other running a rig in North Dakota. What was the common thread that was true for both of these individuals who by demographics were very different? What made them so special? They were driving extraordinary results and driving extraordinary followership. You heard it from our good friends at Celanese. Admired leaders drive results and create great followership. From there, the quest is singular in focus, and all of Eli and I's conversations, as well as the conversations with all of our colleagues and partners and clients across the globe. The singular focus is very transformational in every area of personal and professional life. What are the common behaviors of the world's best leaders? Common. They're relevant in every situation and circumstance, and their behaviors, they're practical and can be implemented immediately. We are excited to have increased the capacity to share behaviors of admired leadership, multiple formats, experiences, some of which you already heard from Scott, the things coming up. There's a digital self-paced platform that some of you may be familiar with, other of you may be resonating with you now, to half-day customized programs, to monthly team dialogues, to one-on-one executive coaching. We like to keep things, everything we do, you hear me say over and over again, simple and practical, and we love conversations and dialogue. We're having incredible conversations around this content right now. People who are already engaged with us and interested in going deeper, as well as people who are saying, why have I never heard of this before? We're discussing all levels of engagement with individuals looking to develop their personal leadership, leaders looking to forge better teams of leaders, and HR talent professionals seeking to implement in a similar way that you just heard from Celanese today. Action items, if anything you've heard today resonates with you, is simple and practical. Number one, Eli, as he referred to, is going to drop in the chat box a link to simply book some time with one of us so that we can hear more, number one, about what's spurring energy in you, whether it's enthusiasm for something you've heard on this call, or it's reservation towards something happening in you or your organization right now. In addition to that, you'll of course receive a follow-up email from being on the call today. We'd love for you to share that recording with others you think would benefit from that tremendous conversation with Vanessa and Jameson, and as well as there'll be some other ways to connect with us too. Admired Leadership is a diverse community of leaders engaged in an ongoing conversation about the best practices of leadership excellence. We would love and look forward to any opportunity to engage you in this continual conversation. All the best. Again, special thanks to our guests, but all the best to everyone who joined us to you and your families this year. Scott, I'm going to hand it back to you to close us out, sir.
I am unmuted, and then now I'm going to magically put myself back. And thanks again. I will be looking forward to seeing what the orange, will it be like an orange sweater under the jacket? You got a lot of options there. And Wes around the office is known for always kind of having a little bit of the admired leadership purple going on. So we put that into the background today. So dynamite. Really appreciate you guys. And thanks to all of you. I know that many of you dialed in not knowing exactly what to expect, and hopefully you kind of got a sense of what we do. We dive deep on leadership topics. Sometimes we're looking at a particular company and what's going on. Other times a theme around some of our content. And then a lot of times just the Q&A. One of the things I wanted to talk about, and Carolyn mentioned this in terms of like, what's the difference in learning between just training and real development? And it really is dialogue and discussion. So if you're a subscriber and you're regularly part of these every 3 weeks that we have for those that do have full access, you know that we have study groups and we have live podcast tapings like this. By the way, full access subscribers, when we do these live podcast recordings, they then get a private feed that you can put into any podcast app, so that if you don't have time to watch and sit down and watch something happening online and you don't have a question to ask that particular day, we still cover a tremendous amount of, and in fact, I would say, I listen to a lot of business podcasts. The content around the questions that we cover is about the best that you can get. And so we've conveniently put that into a private podcast feed so that you can review it anytime you want. And also, by the way, I know Field Note subscribers, you understand the power that you can read a Field Note, or you can click on the Substack link that lets you play the audio. Sometimes I'm just going to be getting ready in the morning and I want to just play that or play it in the car. Well, we kind of think the same thing. So even within our platform, all of the content that we have is put into you can watch the video, but there's a private feed in audio. So that if you said, all right, could I just listen to a very short 5, 6, 7 minute podcast around a really tough leadership challenge or a behavior I want to tackle? Would that start your day in a better way? That we have that as well. Now, we've called our discussion groups study groups in the past, and we've kind of moved that to discussion groups, community discussion groups. And so you'll start to see those names being mentioned because we think it's a better representation of what we're trying to do. And we have folks from all over the world that meet regularly. Once a month, there's an admired leadership coach that's in there. There's no additional cost for that for the people that have already joined the full access community. And we think that's just a tremendous opportunity. And so we're excited about those as well. We did have that question coming in saying, what's going to be happening at this March event? And what happens at these one days, we had one in New York and one in Austin. We've had a couple of these new longer 4-day events that have happened in the Berkshires, and we've done it for 25 years in Southern Utah. The 1-day events are for subscribers, although we have a lot of people that actually sign up and become members in order to go to one of the 1 days. They're nearby. So you have all of the digital content that you get on the platform. But when you get in that room and we go through 8, 9, 10 of the specific behaviors, and our founder, Randall, and some other coaches are there, it creates a real vibrant conversation. And we have people that really know the content. They've been subscribers. They've gone through it. Some have went to both of the 1 days that we had, just because they know how powerful that is. And not only for them as they learn the behaviors, but you start to say, I'd kind of like to be around other people who kind of feel that this stuff is important, right? And you just say, I think I found the people that really love leadership in the way that I do, right? That it's not about being the leader up on the pedestal. And I always say, it's like, if you think of yourself as a visionary leader, you probably shouldn't go around telling people you're a visionary leader. Just be visionary, right? You don't have to tell them. Some of the best leaders are the quietest leaders. And if you're making people in situations better, then you're our kind of a leader. And one of the things that I'll close with this that I love to see was Megan just put in the comment at the end after listening to Vanessa and Jameson saying the discussion for her was so powerful because her organization is going through this refresh of mission and vision and values. And for her, the word was hopeful. So hearing how it worked for Celanese was giving her some energy and some hope that she can do it with her organization as well. So whatever you came into this with today, whether it was just curiosity, a real challenge or problem you were having for yourself, or a way to find solutions for you and your organization, we're just glad you stopped by. We're here to help you. We're fans of what you're doing, and you can count on us to be in your corner. So thank you all, and you will get a link to the recorded version of this. And for our regular subscribers, we'll see you in just a couple of weeks. Thanks, everybody.